Hi, this is Ed from 6 and I'm back for episode 4 of You Me in the UKTC. Those of you watching on a larger screen, not a mobile phone, may notice that I have less hair than I had the last time I was recording. And that is because I lost to Dark Angels on Thursday. As tradition insists, I have ritualistically shaved my skull and will remain so bald until I regain my honor at my next tournament. I am going to be talking about tides of conviction and also what I expect to see or how I go about building my lists for the UKTC. It's not a full list building review episode, but I want to talk about how I think about going into the UKTC, what I would sort of look to put into my lists, how I think about structuring them, and also I'll be looking at a couple of things, how I would play into the top armies in the meta at the moment. So the first thing to talk about is this a shooting or a melee favored map pack? Full disclosure, I like putting guns in my list. I am a filthy, filthy shooting player, and that absolutely skews my perception. However, I would say, especially compared to last year's mission pack, this is significantly more melee friendly, mostly around mission 3. I think if you're playing a full melee army, when you're playing a full shooting army, when you're playing conversion, you're going to have a very difficult time into fast melee armies. And I think that means, especially more towards the top tables, you will see more balanced armies that can activate in multiple phases because it's very difficult to interact with your opponent. And if you're looking to go 5-0, having one map where a fast melee army is a 90-10 win to them in an equal skill match is not what you want to be doing. Something to think about as well is the engagement ranges for turn 1. It's not often you get a turn 1 charge off, but there is a single map with an 18-inch deployment gap in the middle, which makes it quite easy. Maybe not to get a turn 1 charge, but to set up for a turn 2 charge very easily, put the pressure on your opponent very early. You also want to have a look at the staging ruins. I believe in 3 of the map packs. There are staging runes right in the center of the board, which make it very easy for you to play those fast melee armies into the center. I'd also want to have a look at what is the meta in the UK currently. Fortunately, we have just had another UKTC major this weekend just gone. That happened down in Southampton. And it was quite a diverse meta, I think, in part due to where it was. I think some of the names that I would expect to see at the UKTC events didn't go. Typically, they tend to skew around the Midlands or up towards the north. Obviously, Manchester in the north, it's a lot more tickets. It is absolutely overbooked. It's going to be a huge event, so I'm expecting to see all the familiar faces there. And I'd probably expect to see more skew towards some of the lists that I've picked out. It was won by Imperial Guard, played by David Gaylard, which is obviously a fantastic player. Never had any doubt in you. And I'm not just saying that because you left a nice comment on my last video. So coming into Manchester, what am I thinking about having to deal with? Firstly, I've got Dark Angels. Dark Angels are an omnipresent threat, and I think we'll see more and more people pick them up because they are a fairly easy army to play. I think they are the new Leviathan Nids in that you can play them pretty mediocrely and get a 3-2 or a 4-1. There is a lot of skill expression that you can do with the characters, I feel, having played into a couple of good Dark Angels players. But I think the floor of the list is quite low. Where you can take it above there still goes quite high. I don't think it's an unskilled list if you're playing it well. Demons are omnipresent. Turns out having a 4-up or a 3-up invuln across the army is great in a shooting meta, especially when we were expecting to see loads of Space Marine players packing multi-melters, although I think that fear has maybe fallen off a little bit. Imperial Guard, obviously fantastic. In my opinion, one of the only pure shooting armies you can play on a UKTC format because they have so much line of sight. It is very unpleasant to play against. Tau, there was a chunk of Tau. Even though I'm going to be playing Tau myself at Manchester, I don't think it's something that you necessarily need to be super worried about. You've probably played against Tau a lot over the last 18 months or so. You probably know how to play against them. I don't think they're in the best state in this meta. Custodes are omnipresent. They are tanky, especially if you're seeing the advance and charge Warden bricks, 10-man wardens, you're going to slam all your defensive buffs on there. They've got the 6-up Feel No Pain. That can be quite hard to deal with for some armies that don't have the output to kill them. Eldari, mixed Eldari, they are omnipresent, in good hands. They are terrifying. I think we might see a bit of a skew away from Eldari, honestly, with more Imperial Guard coming into the meta, because mortars just ruin the day of Eldari players. Marines, Iron Hands. I'm expecting to see Iron Hands. There'll be some other armies in there, but Iron Hands are the ones that you need to plan for. You need to think about how am I going to screen out my army from the drop pods. And then Knights as well. I don't think Knights are an army that are positioned to win GTs consistently, but they are. It almost feels like they're back as to where they were in 8th edition, which is a bit of a gatekeeper list. I would expect a good player to probably go 4-1 with Knights. They'll hit a matchup that they can't win, but they will roll over armies and players who aren't used to dealing with them. So what can you do? Can you deal with the following? Can you deal with OBSEC tanky 3-wound models, Deathwing Terminators, Wardens for Custodes? Can you deal with fast or deep strike shooting? So Iron Hands, Tau if you come up against them. Can you deal with non-line of sight shooting? This is a big one. If you have lots of T3 4-up save, 5-up save models, you're going to be very sad coming up into Imperial Guard because they will just pick up all your scoring units very quickly. Can you deal with mass T7 OBSEC? You know, if you're playing into Knights and you just go, oh, hold on, my entire army is built around dealing with the demon threat. I've got high output with low AP, but I actually haven't got anything to deal with Knights. You might struggle there. And Genestealer Cult. Can you deal with Genestealer Cult? The answer is, have you played them before? If not, go and watch Tom's videos. He is breaking down what they do, what they're good at. They're an army that once you know how they play, you can beat them. But the first time you play into them is a very difficult way to play. So the main threats that I would say you're going to be facing into are Dark Angels, Demons, and Imperial Guard. Those are the 3 that I think are going to be dominating the meta over the next few months until we get the next balance patch. Custodes as well, but I think Custodes are one of those armies where it feels like you know what they're going to do, unless they're playing with Venatari spam or bikes, and bikes have very much fallen out of favor. It is quite easy to see their threat ranges and you can play around them, and it's just whether you can break the shield wall that they're presenting. So what is Tides of Conviction? Tides of Conviction is a hold 2, hold 3, hold more map. It's another one of those. You know, this is a potential to really blow your opponents away on the primary. If you have great OBSEC, fantastic. If you have strong shooting to keep them off the objectives in the open, fantastic. All great things. You get, for the tertiary, if you're holding your opponent's territory objectives, you get 2 points. Just for holding one, you don't get multiple for holding multiple objectives. But you also get 3 for each in your opponent's territory that you hold at the end of the game. So you don't score any on turn 5, but you do score 3 per objective that you hold at the end of the game. That means that this map is absolutely a map that you have a turn 2 advantage on. Some maps it's not too bad, especially if you can get aggressive early on, but this is a huge swing. If you can roll well and go second, you're laughing. If you can't, you really want to think about how do I take the fight to the opponent. If I'm going first here, I know that I've got to put the pressure on my opponent. I've got to really punish them early on. Try and table them if I can, because if they're getting that flat, you know, potentially they're getting 21 points at the end of turn 5 at the end of the game. It's very difficult to overcome that with early scoring unless you've really put the pressure on your opponent. So playing into Dark Angels, what can you put in your list and how can you play against them to punish them? Do you have any way of re-rolling wounds with AP3 weaponry? If yes, put it in your list. It's going to be good anyway. It's going to be good into everything, but it's definitely going to be good into Dark Angels. It's one of the few things that you can really try and chip away with them in. How are Dark Angels going to play this map? Well, they're going to probably push their army into the middle of the board because they can, and not many armies can interact with them in a meaningful way to take them off that. So they're likely going to come out into here. They're going to look to either take this sort of quad here, or they might look to push down here. You've got a lot of options if you're the Dark Angels player. It's a great map for Codex Warfare. If you want to deny them primary, you're probably going to have to feed something onto this map here, or you're going to have to push out here or here to try and deny them primary. And if you're doing that, they can absolutely kill something in the shooting phase with a heavy weapon. They will be packing them. It's less good for oaths. It is okay. You can do some nice jank with characters. So you could put a brick of 10 here. You could put a character screened in there. Thank you to Ben Pritchard for showing me that lovely nugget on Thursday. And that way you can score Codex Warfare without really being punished too heavily. Something to keep in mind is home objectives are about 17 inches away from here to here. That's quite a lot. That is exactly the maximum move and charge distance of a Deathwing Terminator, assuming that you don't kill them and they then get resurrected to give them an extra 4 inches of movement. So what you want to do is you want to try and bring overwhelming pressure to the point where they've put less models, especially if they have skimped out over here. If they have only put, maybe a couple of Deathwing command squads or a 5-man squad, if you can punish skewing to the left, that is a great way to pick up a chunk of their army without them interacting with you, but also punish them on the primary where normally they should run away with it because they've got such tanky OBSEC models. So this here is really where I would be focusing. Your opponent's going to want to put models here, step one out, raise a banner. You want to try and stop them from doing that. If you can take down the banners, fantastic. An easy way to do that is to have shooting threats that can shoot down here and make it so that your opponent has to pull the model on the objective or risk losing the full squad. If you can't do that, they are going to get, quite high scoring primary because they can comfortably sit behind this wall. It's a lot harder for you to interact with them that way. And also, it's quite close. They can get to your objectives from this stage of ruin. Not that they necessarily need to stage because they are very tanky, but they can realistically advance onto this point, maybe not advance into this point, but get a charge into this point. You've got to be very careful not to allow them to slingshot into your lines. A quick overview on what I do into Imperial Guard. Imperial Guard are going to be playing probably mortars, and they're probably going to be in this ruin. So can you interact with them meaningfully? I hope you can. If you're playing, for example, a fast shooting army like Tau, as I myself will be playing, I might want to start off a couple of bodyguard with burst cannons and cyclics here, and then flat advance 18 inches, draw as much of a line of sight as possible here, thin the ranks of the stuff that's going to kill all my chaff or my scoring units. If you can't interact with Mortar Corner, maybe start things in reserve. That's, I think, a strong way to deal with Imperial Guard. If you've got a lot of T3 low save models or even T4 models with even decent saves, starting it in strategic reserve, it does cede some board control, but it also means that turns 3 onwards, you'll still have some, and it might mean that they're putting mortars into things that are fairly ineffective against. Can you tag or move block? This is a great mission for move blocking, especially if you have forward deploy. If your opponent deploys tanks here, which is, not necessarily a bad place to put them, they can screen if you've got your own firepower down here. It is something that lets you really dictate where the models go if you can get into this bit here and try and block your opponent. Something else you can do is charge the tanks. Obviously, they have the turret rule, which lets them fire out of combat. But what that does is it pins them in place. You pick the fire angles that they can sit in, and especially if you're also move blocking at the same time. And also, something that I think people seem to be playing wrong is models take the -1 to hit while there's an enemy in engagement range. Even if you're shooting out with the turret gun, you're still taking the -1 because you have a model in engagement range. Obviously, if they clear you off with 3 heavy flamers on the hull, you're not going to take the negative when you shoot the main gun. But it is something to keep in mind. It might be worth throwing away that unit of Kroot Hounds from behind a wall, tagging them up, making it so that they are leaving your other units alive. Keep an eye on how many units of Kassagan they have. I would expect to see 2. 3 is a little bit expensive to do, but what that means is they have 2. Really, they've got 2 turns where they can meaningfully use those to pick up stuff. You probably want to provide them with one target that they want to shoot at. You've got to try and bait out the Kasrkin somehow, unless you're, getting a charge into them. But try not to expose multiple high-value units, even though normally you might want to fully bum rush an opponent. If you've got an opportunity to keep other units safe while only exposing one, that limits the amount of mortal wound firepower that they can put out into you. And can you put non-line of sight shooting of your own into an army list? I'm not going to be doing it myself, but I know some Tau players are looking at the commander with the non-line of sight shooting. I don't think that's a great use of your commanders in Arcs of Omen, being limited to only 2 of them. But it is something to think about. If you're playing Space Marines, do you want to rock up with some new Desolators? You probably don't. But have a look at what you've got in your book, what sort of non-line of sight shooting you can bring. Just play Imperial Guard and go first and kill their mortars with your mortars. That'll do it. And finally, demons. Demons are an interesting one. So demons are harder to play a board control game against because they can be pretty much wherever they want to be. To quickly recap, obviously they have normal deep strike rules when you're within your deployment. If you're outside of your deployment, then they can deep strike anywhere your leadership away. So if you've got screening units, again, back to Tau, such as Crew Hounds with a leadership 5, they can come in 4 inches away from you, assuming they've got a model within 12, because they're debuffing you for -1 leadership anyway. This makes screening quite a bit harder, and you probably want to try and put some sort of deep strike denial into your list, especially with Genestealer Cult being on the horizon as well. I would be looking at, if you're playing Tau, take the relic that gives you a deep strike denial bubble. If you're playing Space Marines, take some not infiltrators, whatever the forward deploy with the 12-inch deny is. Whatever you've got that can do that, obviously Imperial Guard, they can blanket orders, 12-inch area of denial. Demons really have to start on the board against them. Look at so deep strike denial is important. You probably also want to look at spacing. If your opponent is running a Lord of Change or even just a Herald of Tzeentch, they might be running Gateway of Infinity. This is quite a nasty power that can splash a lot of mortal wounds. If you've castled up behind here and your opponent spots an opportunity to, use the 2 CP strat to teleport a Tzeentch unit, to get line of sight, they might fire off with Gate. I can't get my words out. They might fire off with Gate of Infinity, or whatever that power is called. The one that's a splash mortal wounds. Fast melee. That is something that I would say characterizes modern demon lists. I'm seeing a lot of flesh hounds. I'm seeing a lot of fiends. Even you might even include the greater demons in that, with them being able to fly and then charge over, quite fast melee. So you've got to really think about your threat ranges. Beast of Nurgle, that's one that we're seeing quite a lot pop up. You've got to be able to allocate the right amount of damage into Beast of Nurgle, because if you don't fully kill them at the end of a phase, they heal up to full. What that means is you've got to have decent shooting into bullet sponge targets, or decent activations into bullet sponge targets. Don't put firepower into them that isn't going to do anything. And finally, greater demons. Do you have the tools to deal with greater demons? This can be difficult. Be'lakor, if you're a shooting army, he's got the -1 to hit, -1 to wound, -1 damage. Obviously, the -1 damage is only against shooting attacks. If you've got the Lord of Change with the Impossible Robe and the whatever his other rule is, he can be -1 to hit, -1 to wound, and he can ignore the first failed save as well. Very nasty. He can buff himself with +1 toughness. You might be playing against the wound cap Bloodthirster. Have you got any way to overcome that? I don't necessarily think it's worth putting wound cap ignoring abilities in your army just for that. But if it is a relic that's worth having, like if you're playing Nid still, if you've got the Reaper, it's definitely still worth putting in so you can try and deal with those big threats. The main thing I think about when playing against demons, though, is how I screen. So whereas you might sort of push out into the midboard against other armies that don't have large amounts of shooting, with demons, you want to try and maintain zones of control. So turn 1, if you go first, or sorry, turn 2 if you go first, or turn 1 if you go second, you might want to try and get up into these ruins here with some decent leadership models and try and get this zone of control. Make sure that they can't come into your backfield and get some cheeky charges off. Put 3 flamers there and kill a small unit of chaff that's holding a back objective. And then as you skew into the later game, you might want to pivot towards the left-hand side of the map and turn it into sort of a hammer and anvil deployment. The reason for this is it's a lot easier to screen your back line while also getting valuable objectives, especially into armies that aren't bringing large amounts of shooting. And this lets you come out here and threaten their home objective. Obviously, they could do the same to you. So that's a rough overview on sort of what I'd be thinking about coming into Manchester. What are you thinking of playing? Have you got any thoughts for what you're taking? If you're a Tau player, please do put them in the comments. I am writing multiple lists every day, and I can't for the life of me narrow it down to one that I want to take. Let me know what you're going to be taking, and please do say hi if you do see me in Manchester.